Hi, everybody. It's me, True Powers Mind, and this is a special report. Today, we have a very special guest I'm pleased to introduce. His name is Wayne Madsen, and a brief bio of this gentleman, not to include everything because it would just take me hours, but he was a U.S. Naval member. Also, he is a journalist, author, columnist, specializing in intelligence and international affairs. Also, a former NSA member. We have Wayne Madsen on the phone today. Wonderful man. And guys, really, this is real time. This is my very first conversation with Wayne. You all know normally I talk to people beforehand, but this is the very first time. Been extremely busy, but we got you, Wayne. And, I do have some questions for you, Wayne, but, first I would like, for you to say a couple words to the audience, if you like.
Well, I just would say that there's an awful lot of news out there, and I certainly don't agree with Mr. Trump when he calls it fake news, but I would say there's diversionary news. There's a lot of important things going on in the country and around the world, and these cable TV networks. I try to bypass them with my website by concentrating on real events that are taking place.
Would you plug your website for us? I'm sorry, I didn't plug your website.
It's Wayne Madsen, WayneMadsenReport.com.
Yes.
And it's a subscription site for the what I call the executive content. But also there's free side of the firewall, the paywall, that provides just what I call news and pithy comments, links to stories that just don't get a lot of attention that are very, very important things that are going on.
Well, I will put those links in the comment section below. When I finally edit this video, I'll have links directly to his website, so you can check that out. Do you have any books that or anything like that you read?
Yeah, I have several, but I'll just mention the last one because it's probably getting a lot more attention than most. It's called The Almost Classified Guide to CIA Front Companies, Proprietaries, and Contractors, and it's really the only effort I've seen, and I talked about past efforts to compile all the CIA front companies and contractors into one reference book. It's encyclopedic format, and apparently based on some of the reviews, no one else has done this before. I didn't think they did. The idea for it was from a former CIA officer who also happened to work for two of the major news networks. But after he worked for the agency, NBC and CBS, and he said that this book was very important. I should do it. And I said, I don't think I could get more than 100 pages on a book like that because how many of these front companies can there be? We know about the big ones, Air America and Southern Air Transport, and some of the others, but. Now it's 422 pages.
Wow.
And so I was even surprised when I started compiling.
And you got all this information through Freedom of Information Acts, I'm assuming?
Yeah, well, FOIA, also many hours at the National Archives going through old CIA files. Fortunately, they're all electronic now. So it wasn't pouring through boxes of paper, and also there's many other books about the CIA. I've mentioned certain companies, but as I say, nobody has ever put them all together in sort of a reference book.
I got you, a true expository piece. Normally I would leave the questions for at the end, but I really want to get these questions out kind of early, so then we can move on to the rest of the discussion. But I have a question from Dimebag Darley. He's actually my co-host on the other morning show. He wanted me to ask you, what is your opinion on William Binney?
Oh, I know Bill Binney. I've known him for a few years. I didn't know him certainly when I worked at NSA. I know he was somewhere in that labyrinth when I worked there back in the 80s. But I certainly, after I got to know him, I realized that he was sort of the architect of some of the programs that I heard about way back in the late '80s when I was still working at NSA, and he said, "Yeah, I'm the guy that came up with that." And I said, "That's amazing." I was a little bit put off by what I had heard, because what the NSA this is '86, '87 time frame. What they were talking about was a program called Total Hearability. Of course, this is before the internet, so communications was primarily analog. But the NSA wanted to be able to hear anything, any phone call, any walkie-talkie conversation, just about anything. And now, of course, we know with the internet, they've gone to more advanced forms of being able to read everything, emails, and we know that there were these programs that we found out because of Ed Snowden's revelations, PRISM and other programs like that. I know Bill Binney, and I know he later had the same reservations about where NSA was going with some of this technology as I did.
Okay, the next question is from Rico86. Ask him about Robert Mueller's investigation, like your opinion on Robert Mueller's.
Well, Robert Mueller, he's a former prosecutor, and he worked in the Southern District of New York. He also worked out of Boston. His primary brief was going after white collar crime, and a lot of the people he's brought onto his team are specialists in similar criminal areas, especially money laundering. And of course, the Southern District of New York, where actually Mueller has had a lot of experience there, as has Andrew Weinberg, who was one of his top investigators. Jim Comey came out of there. Really? Andrew McCabe was also out of the Southern District of New York, and he specialized in he was part of what they call the FBI, New York Police Department, a joint task force to combat Eurasian organized crime. And why did they have to say Eurasian? I mean, we're not talking about Mongolians or people from Tajikistan or Afghanistan. We're talking about Russian Jews primarily, who came into New York to the Brighton Beach area in the 1980s, when people like Henry Jackson, Kosher Nostra is another name. It's used by the FBI, but for political reasons and whatnot, they can't say it publicly. But McCabe, I really feel that one of the reasons that Trump went after McCabe is because he knew his background in putting some of Trump's old cronies in jail. We're talking about the late '90s and early 2000s, and so Comey worked in that office. Comey worked out of the Southern District, and he did his fair share in putting a lot of these gangsters. These are people that mostly live in Brighton Beach and Brooklyn. They call it Little Odessa. They call it Little Russia, Little Ukraine. But they first came over here when people like Senator Henry Jackson said, "Oh, we're going to keep sanctions on the Soviet Union unless you allow Soviet Jews to emigrate to Israel." Well, guess what? Surprise, surprise. They didn't go to Israel. They came to New York, and they got involved in all kinds of organized criminal activity. And one of them, by the way, is named Michael D. Cohen, who all his associates, his father-in-law, were all involved in criminal activities. Everything from running numbers to the taxi cab business that they were in, which wasn't entirely on the up and up, and casinos like Mr. Trump's casinos in Atlantic City, which were so mobbed up. We still don't know what happened in 1989 when Donald Trump went to the helipad in Midtown Manhattan and waved goodbye to 3 of his executives with the Trump organization that he had asked to fly to New York for a press conference on the big upcoming boxing match between Hector Macho Camacho, and I forget the other guy who was in the fight. Anyway, that fight was scheduled in the Atlantic City Convention Center for February of 1990. Trump went out there and said, "Hey guys, something came up. I can't join you on the flight back to Atlantic City on a helicopter." And he runs a helicopter, crashes right off the Garden State Parkway about 20 minutes outside of Atlantic City. What's very strange about the crash is the pilot of the helicopter. All the 3 execs and the pilot were killed, but the pilot was in communication with the control tower at McGuire Air Force Base just before the incident and said everything's fine. You know, they did a check on his progress, and checking in with the control tower, and people in the area said they heard a loud explosion. The debris field was over a few miles, and which is odd for a helicopter. And the 3 execs who died were scheduled to be questioned by the FBI about mob influence with Donald Trump's casinos in Atlantic City and his promotion of sporting events like the Hector Camacho boxing match. And of course, the links were to Nicky Scarfo, who was the mafia, head of the mafia in Atlantic City and Philadelphia. And just a little footnote, 7 days before Donald Trump was sworn in as president, Nicky Scarfo, who got life in prison, died suddenly of a heart attack.
Oh, well, we do have drugs. We do have drugs to make that happen.
So, yeah, that's a long story about Bob Mueller. This is what Bob Mueller is looking into. It's not just, look, I think it's very hard to prove the election manipulation. I wrote about it in 2000 in Florida. I wrote about it in 2004 in Florida and Ohio. But in both elections, they were delivered to George W. Bush on a silver platter, when in fact Al Gore had won in 2000 and John Kerry won in 2004. That's a very hard one because both parties have their hands in this election manipulation. Republicans a bit more than much more, I would say, than Democrats. But what Mueller can get this guy on, and his cronies and his son-in-law and his 2 sons, is money laundering, and that's exactly what Trump has been up to ever since he started dabbling in high visibility real estate in Manhattan and casinos in Atlantic City.
Wow. I mean, another question from Christy Carter. Why are out-of-the-country couples adopting black kids and no one is talking about it and the numbers are being suppressed?
Are they talking about foreign people?
Yeah, foreign couples adopting black children.
Out of the United States?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's something I haven't really been keeping up on. I'm very concerned, though, about the safety of children with this administration. We know about the issue with Putin stopping the adoption of Russian children because there was abuse taking place. The couples that were adopting Russian kids were abusing them, and he found out about it. It was not only physical abuse; it was sexual abuse. And now it just came across that these Mexican and Hispanic children that are being separated from their parents at the border are going to be put in military bases in Arkansas and Texas. My experience with the military, it's nice to go out on Memorial Day and Armed Forces Day and watch the jets and the parades and all that. I was involved in when I was in the Navy in a major bust of. I was working as a temporary special agent at the time for the FBI and NCIS.
Oh wow!
It was called NIS in those days. A major pedophile ring in the U.S. Navy that did not stop with the U.S. Navy. It was in all services, and it was in all ranks, from enlisted all the way up to admirals. And so I'm very concerned that we've got a president who I've written about.
I'm so sorry, Wayne. I'm so sorry. I never heard of that. You are saying our generals, our colonels, our majors, our officers,
and all of them. Not all of them, but
I mean,
these people should have gone to prison. But and now my commanding officer, who I turned in and testified at his court-martial, he was supposedly given 4 years of hard labor in Fort Leavenworth. He didn't do that. He did 18 months attending sex abuse, seminars or whatever.
Wow.
Very light. It sure wasn't making little ones out of big ones on the rock pile, that's for sure. And he did only 18 months. Look, they take care of each other.
Wow.
I've heard of cases where admirals and generals have been involved in the same kind of thing, and they just let them retire and say, okay, there's a very nasty culture. Look, we know it happened in the Catholic Church. We know it happens in other religious denominations. I mentioned, Michael Cohen out of the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn. They have a huge pedophile problem there, and they try to cover it up. It's like we'll take care of it, just like the Vatican said we're going to take care of it.
And they have.
And so I do know one thing. There was, of course, after the Haiti earthquake, there was a group out of Arkansas, a woman who ran some sort of Baptist mission type thing, went to Haiti and tried to get these kids back to the United States, and they still had parents. They had discovered their parents. Look, the same thing happened in Africa. I don't know about it happening in reverse, but I know when in Chad, when there was a big war problem, civil war in Chad, that the French were adopting kids and sending them up to France. In one case, they wound up in an operation that was run by the brother of Nicolas Sarkozy, the president of France, and it was determined later that there was pedophiles running the operation. And of course Sarkozy during one presidential campaign said, "Look, we gotta rethink our attitude towards pedophiles. We can't put them in jail. We gotta treat them for their illness. Like, let's give them a pass." Well, it's obvious to me later why he said that. He was trying to protect his brother for one thing, and so I'm always concerned when you hear about something like, why are foreign couples adopting African American children out of the United States? Now, hopefully they have good intentions, but I'm sorry, what I've seen in the past with religious groups, the missionaries, the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn and in New Jersey, these people are up to no good. And then Donald Trump himself, I mean, civil litigation, he faced him and Jeffrey Epstein in 1994, accused of sodomizing and raping a 13-year-old girl and a 12-year-old girl. So, I mean...
That's fucking bullshit. I'm sorry, I'm enraged now. Seriously, I'm fucking enraged. The only thing I ever heard about was the fucking British fucking government doing their fucking stupid shit, having soldiers take kids off streets for their bullshit, but I thought that shit actually died there. I did not realize it's been there.
Unfortunately, look, all you got to look at some of the operations, and now I don't know this because I certainly don't have any direct communications with Robert Mueller's office, but he's looking at a lot of things in Trump's background, and I heard through the grapevine, and it's a pretty good source, that the incident with Epstein in New York in 1994, all that information has been made aware to Mueller and his team. Now, there's a statute of limitations issue, but the more he knows about the targets, in this case Trump, the better off he can go after this guy for his high crimes and misdemeanors, which of course you need to prove if you're going to impeach somebody.
Exactly, and you better have all your ducks in the barrel, because you are dealing with the most powerful man You know.
Yeah, you saw today in the Senate had a lunch. The Republicans in the Senate had a luncheon for Trump, and not one during the luncheon criticized this Kelly Sadler, who was one of his communications people, for saying that McCain he's dying anyway. You know, this is their colleague, their Senate colleague. Now, one can disagree or agree with McCain, and I certainly have written a lot of negative things about McCain over the years, but these Republicans wouldn't even stand up and speak on behalf of one of their colleagues.
No.
When this woman said what she said, and it included at the luncheon was Lindsey Graham, who's one of the biggest Trump butt kissers there is. And he says he's a friend of, he claims he's a friend of John McCain.
Oh,
and
God.
So none of them. So, you know, I mean, so what I'm getting at is if you remember, Trump said I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
And, you know.
Oh, my God, yes. Yeah.
You're going to have to prove something even worse than that. And I think pedophilia, I think it's worse maybe than even going out and murdering somebody. I mean, it's a taboo in all. It's a taboo in almost every religion I can think of. You know. Yeah,
with people who are actually practicing the religion for real. You know, you go in there with notorious
real religious, real religious people. Yeah,
absolutely.
And
I'm sorry.
Certainly, that wouldn't apply. That probably wouldn't apply to most of the Republican senators because they certainly don't practice what they preach.
No, of course not. I mean. And where are they really practicing? Let's face it, you know, a lot of religion texts have been debased, been misinterpreted. And actually, I do have a question for you myself. Is there any relevance or truth to this QAnon or QAnon phenomenon?
No. The idea that Trump is rolling up an international, and the whole pizzagate thing and all this business, look, he's part of it. He's part of it. Remember one thing about Donald Trump, how he projects? He always accuses people of doing what he's doing, right?
Right.
He says they're lying. They put out fake news. Well, he's liar. He puts out fake news. And then then people are saying, look, that, this whole Pizzagate was nonsense from the very beginning. I looked into it. I found some things, but nothing illegal. I found that, for example, the idea was, look, I've been to that pizza place, Comet Ping Pong. It's a neighborhood pizza place up on Connecticut Avenue in D.C. It's in kind of I would say a high-rent residential area. But, families, you can't park there, so families walk up there and take their kids there, right?
Right.
So, there's no basement. They said, people, they try to explain it away. These are idiots. I mean, there's one guy on the internet puts out YouTube videos and doesn't know anything about Washington, D.C. Some of these people try to say, the kids were being tortured in the basement. Well, there's no basement. Well, no, it's the subway line. Well, the subway line, it runs nowhere near this place, right? I mean, there's not a subway station anywhere near that. The red line is pretty far away. I've walked it, I know, from the metro station. And then so they try to, this is, of course, fake news. And unfortunately, people like Alex Jones hypes this stuff.
Yeah.
He puts it out there, and then he has to issue retractions when he's hit with he gets a lawyer's letter saying, look, my client's going to sue you for defamation. and then he pulls back. I just say anybody that's thinking about suing Alex Jones, that guy's paying $47,000 a month in support to his ex-wife.
Wow.
So good luck trying to collect from this guy. This guy doesn't have hardly any money. That's why he's selling all kinds of voodoo powders and stuff that looks like it's been cooked up by Grandpa and the Munsters down in the basement. And he's just like Donald Trump. Donald Trump has no money either. That's why we're in trouble. He's basically taken favors and money from almost every gangster and crook on the planet, and now they've had, they're calling in the markers.
It's funny that you mentioned that about Trump, President Trump, actually, because I've been talking to Judge Joe Brown, and he basically said the richest president we ever had was Barack Obama, and most people don't get it because Barack Obama's stepfather, Lo Centero, apparently had a lot of money in Obama.
Well, Lo worked in the oil. Well, I was in Jakarta and I investigated. I wrote a book called The Manufacturing of the President.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Lolo worked in the oil industry. He worked for Exxon back in the day, and he was a member of what they call the Jakarta Oil Club. By the way, there's a Houston Oil Club and there's a Dallas Oil Club. You got to have a little bit of money, or you got to be a person of means to be members of these these organizations. So he didn't do well. He didn't do badly, I should say, and I think he did fairly well by Indonesian standards. The other thing is, one of the homes that Barack lived in was in the diplomatic area of Jakarta. It was a very, very high rent, probably the highest rent area in Jakarta at the time.
Wow.
I've been to the home, and it had a wall around it, and even at one time looks like it had some sort of guard shack out there that,
wow,
check people coming in to visit. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things being the descendant of a slave that I found so kind of whack, it seemed like Obama cared more about homosexual issues, cared more about Goldman Sachs issues, cared more about every issue other than the issues.
Look, when he graduated from Columbia, he went to work for Business International Corporation. This was a CIA front. They're in my book. They get 3 pages. They got a big entry, and Business International Corporation, they had, two areas for the CIA that they were penetrating. One was Wall Street, obviously, and Obama edited a couple of newsletters that were directed towards investors. This was back before hedge funds, but, there were many investment funds in New York. And the other target was the United Nations, because they were actually located. Their address was Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, which is like across the street from the United Nations. So that's how he got his start after he graduated from Columbia. And then somebody decided he's better off if we parachute him into south side of Chicago so he can do some spying for us. There was some suspected domestic groups. One is they wanted him to check out the El Rukin gang, which was thought to be getting assistance from Gaddafi. And I always say that one of the reasons Obama wanted to, started that war against Gaddafi was to, basically get him out of the way, because Gaddafi would have remembered any kinds of deals to help the El Rukin gang in Chicago. And if Libyan intelligence were involved in the, and I don't think that's been proven either, but Gaddafi may have had some information about young Obama's exploits in Chicago. He was involved in a lot more than getting money together to build a softball field for the police athletic league.
Well, I thought Gaddafi was supposed to back in the day had given Louis Farrakhan like $1 billion. Or was in the process.
Farrakhan was part of the target. There was another group. I want to say there was a group called the Black Rangers, and the guy that headed up that, Charles Ford, he's serving a life in prison out at the Supermax in Florence. I wonder why he got such a heavy sentence. He was the first guy charged with domestic terrorism in the United States.
What do you
but
think?
I bet he was found with guns, and they were trying to say he was going to commit. He never did anything. They were saying he was going to commit terrorist attacks, right? I mean, this is like the Department of Pre-Crime and Minority Report. But he got life out there at the Supermax, so he can't have any visitors. And I would just bet he had met Obama on occasion out there back in those days.
Pertaining to Louis Farrakhan, because I have a question popping up in the live feed. Do you know a guy named Jeff Fort? Jeff Fort was accused of trying to get anti-tank missiles
I said his name was Jeff Ford. Yeah, that's the guy I'm talking about. Yes,
Jeff Ford.
I got the first name wrong. Ford, Forte, and he was accused of this, and he got life.
A life
in Supermax. So he can't communicate with anyone. I said during the Obama administration, I said, if anyone could get a message to Jeff Ford, or get a message out, it would certainly would be interesting. But the whole purpose of the Supermax is to not allow anybody any communications. Yeah.
Dang. I mean, one thing I saw the other day, one of our officials was talking about, it was a random YouTube video, one of our officials was talking about, we're basically declaring Iran or something as a state sanction of terror, right? How can we do this in clear face when we all know that we armed the Mujahideen, which later becomes Al-Qaeda, which later becomes ISIS. Then we find ISIS with our weapons. It's like, if anybody's sponsoring state terror, I hate to say it, but it almost seems like our intelligence community is doing that.
Well, us and their friends like the Saudis and the Israelis and the United Arab Emirates, this is where the funding for Al-Qaeda came through the Central Bank of Dubai. I had the chief auditor contacted me years ago when I was investigating 9/11, and it became very clear to me that 19 guys with box cutters did not pull it off, and nor did a guy named Bin Laden who was supposedly hiding out in a cave in Afghanistan. This was a major, sophisticated intelligence operation that involved people in the U.S. government, Israel, Mossad, and the Saudis. And you can throw in a couple other suspects, I'm sure, but they were the evil three. And of course, the United Arab Emirates laundering the money to finance these so-called hijackers.
No.
I never thought some of the things they were accused of on the airplanes actually happened.
Well, but you look at the effects of that. The effects of 9/11 did something the fucking Confederates couldn't do. It did something the Nazis couldn't do. It did something the communists couldn't do. And what is that? Literally strip American citizens of basic rights through the Patriot Act and other things.
Yeah.
And that's why I find to be the most tragic deal of the whole situation. We are less free because of 19 guys. If anything, we should ban airports instead of our freedom.
And then, people are saying now, oh, George W. Bush, he looked so moderate. It was during his watch that this happened. And now you get a real fascist president, Donald Trump, bringing in all these terrible neocons like Bolton and others. And then you got neo-Nazis in his administration, and you got diehard Likudniks like Jared Kushner and his daughter Ivanka, and his whole nonsense with moving that embassy. They knew what was going to happen, and she's over there dining with Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham while 60 people are being massacred, 1,700.
Now, can we talk about that embassy move? Because I was raised basically a Christian, so I know about the so-called biblical prophecy where we have to somehow get rid of the Dome of the Rock so we can get that new third temple in there so the Antichrist can go in there and profess himself God and then the Messiah can come back, right? I mean, and a lot of people fear that doesn't occur because there is a time clock. Most people don't realize this. In the Christian religion, there's a time clock. The generation that sees Israel restored will not all pass before Christ returns. Well, when was Israel restored after 2,000 years of not being around? It was 1948 with the League of Nations, or soon to be
United Nations.
United Nations. And they basically seized the land from Palestine and gave it to the Jews, right? The Ashkenazi Jews, not even the true Semitic Jews of the Bible. We're talking about European converts.
Right.
So now we're having a situation where these evangelical, basically extremists, are really going to push this prophecy. But instead of it to be played out, naturally through God's time, they're going to be God's helper. and make this thing come down. Because the reason why this prophecy will not be fulfilled, even if they get the third temple in, because God was supposed to call the people back to the land, not the United Nation.
Yeah. Well, I've been over to Israel twice, and I've gotten, you can have conversations.
Well, do you see any racism? Do you see any racism with like the blue-eyed old white male Jew versus the true Semitic Jew that's basically brown skin or melanated man or woman?
By the way, the original people of the book, you're talking about the Old Testament.
Yes.
They're Palestinians.
Yeah.
Many of them converted to. They first converted to Christianity, so they're the people of the New Testament we read about. And then later, when the Muslim invasion took place, many of them converted to Islam. And, I've had conversations with people who say, prophecy was fulfilled. The Dome of the Rock is the third temple.
What?
Because mosque is just an Arab word for, it's an Arabic word for
temple? But doesn't the temple have to be specifically designed like Solomon's temple? There's a mathematic. Okay, there's for those who don't know, there's this thing called sacred geometry. All right, you can build things along ley lines, along certain hypothetical points of energy that actually amplifies what you're trying to do in said building. All right. Well, according to sacred geometry, there is actual magical, resonance or power in the actual dimensions of Solomon's temple, the way it was designed.
The problem with Israel is that the country was founded by socialists.
Yes.
Ben-Gurion, they didn't believe any of that stuff. I mean, these were people who were agnostic, to say the least, and many of them were atheists. So all of a sudden, then come in the real crazies, and they're talking about Israel. We need to restore biblical Israel. Well, what is biblical Israel? There's some maps that show it between the Nile and the Euphrates, and then you look at where the U.S. has shed its own blood and treasure. Iraq, Syria, and for a short time, Egypt looked like it was a real problem after Mubarak was overthrown, but that whole Arab Spring movement. But you look at the people who were responsible for this, and you find all these neocons, whether they were in the Bush administration or the Obama administration. Now they're back in the Trump administration. But, you got all these people that are basically nothing more than agents of influence for the most right-wing lunatic fringe in Israel. That happens to be the government there, Netanyahu and his cronies. And that's why, the Palestinians are, I got to give them a lot of credit. They're playing this along. Instead of, becoming very violent, which they could do. Of course, they'll be massacred just like we saw in Gaza, which, by the way, this guy, the Deputy White House Press Secretary, I forget his name, Raj Shah, that's his name, referred to Gaza as southern Israel. That's disgusting because the most extreme Jewish terrorist group in Israel, which is in the government, by the way, and has been funded by David Friedman, who's Trump's old lawyer, who's now U.S. ambassador over there. They want to depopulate the people who live in this open-air ghetto called Gaza and have the Jews resettle it.
Wow.
Which they were, Sharon got them out of there originally, and they refer to it as, they refer to Gaza as southern Israel. Now you got this Raj Shah using the most extreme Jewish Likud language in referring to Gaza as southern Israel. We've already had the State Department refer to the West Bank, which is illegally occupied by Israel, as Judea and Samaria. Only the right-wing lunatics in Israel, which is the government of that country, refer to that as Judea and Samaria.
Wow.
We've got a, in matters of diplomacy, I don't think religion has any part to play. I actually was opposed to the U.S. establishing diplomatic relations with Vatican City because I do feel that is violation of separation of church and state. And it's fine that they're an independent country, but why do we have to assign an ambassador there? And the ambassador now is Callista Gingrich, the wife of Newt Gingrich, another right-wing lunatic. You know, why can't you just have the U.S. ambassador to Rome, to Italy, to the Italian Republic, serve as, look, you're accredited to represent us at the Vatican. But why, you know, I don't see
it's like you're double paying for the same service. That guy could easily go from Rome to
exactly two embassies in Rome when only one would be sufficient. Now we've got basically two in Israel. Most of the people are going to still work out of the Tel Aviv embassy, but the Friedman, this guy who gave money to a Jewish terrorist group, is going to be residing in Jerusalem, I guess, so he could be closer to Netanyahu.
And this whole Israel thing, kind of the reason why I bring it up, it segues into what's going on down in South Africa with the EFF taking the land from the white Boers and the Afrikaners and giving it back to the people. You know, you see this trend. So my question is this: how come we haven't done something with the native peoples of America? You know, if everybody's getting, you know, the Jews got their land back, South Africans getting their land back.
I live in outside of Tampa, and I fly the American flag, but right alongside of it, I fly the flag of the Seminole Nation, because the Miccosukee Seminole tribe never did sign a peace treaty with the United States. They decided to move deep into the Everglades, and they lived off the land. And they claim that everything up to basically probably where I live is part of the Seminole Nation, and that would include you know, Miami and Naples and Venice and Key West and everything else. But anyway, but when you look at what Trump's doing, he's right now he wants to mine on Indian on tribal land. He wants to exploit tribal land, and this is in violation of the native treaties that were international treaties signed by in the old executive building of the White House, executive mansion, and now he's abrogating these treaties with these native tribes, what the Canadians call First Nations, which I kind of like that term, because they are nations. But I said I would much rather pay some sort of rent to a restored Seminole Nation governing the southern part of Florida, you know, than pay taxes to Governor Rick Scott, this lunatic Republican governor we have up in Tallahassee, who's only known for defrauding Medicaid. He had a company, and now he's running against the Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. They're saying, oh, he's ahead in the polls. I mean, you guys he's a big crook as Donald Trump. But I feel like I say, I would rather see the Native Americans take over much more of their land, because they were the best stewards of the land, and they wouldn't allow these companies to pollute the way they do. And I would hope that they would take a guy like Scott Pruitt from Oklahoma, which used to be called the Indian Territory, and scalp him. I mean, I think in his case he deserves to be scalped.
You know, that segue, you know, we're talking about environmental issues. I was just talking to a dear friend of mine, a cousin actually of mine, Jane Elliott, and she basically was telling me about what's going on in Iowa. The governor, the egghead up there, declared the state of Iowa as a sanctuary state. And the reason why I'm telling you this, hopefully, you know, you're a true investigative journalist, you can kind of look into this. They got these confined hog farms that are all over the state up there, polluting, fecal material, people are breathing in, get sick. If you try to protest, you get arrested. You know, a true degrade of our rights, you know. And we got to get true journalists involved in this and point of light, because see, there's an aquifer, all right? This aquifer extends all over all these states around us, Iowa,
Yeah.
Kansas, and even that the pipeline that you're talking about, if it breaks and that oil gets it down in that groundwater, guess what? Us folks down here in Missouri, Arkansas,
fracking that's going on. There's people in Pennsylvania have turned on their faucet and flames have come out.
Oh shit!
Yeah, flames have come out because of the gas, the fumes and whatnot, and you got on the Delmarva Peninsula, which is Delaware, Maryland, and a little part of Virginia. You got all these Purdue chicken plants,
yeah.
Tyson chicken, and of course, where does all the chicken manure get? It goes into the water tank. It goes into the Chesapeake Bay, and listeria. You got outbreaks of listeria in fish, and shellfish and regular fish. You've got this problem, and you mentioned the pig farms in Iowa. It's the same thing with some of the cattle ranches. It's just it's cattle just wallowing, packed so tight and wallowing in their own manure, and all this stuff, of course, goes in. And what is Trump doing? He's got this guy Pruitt who's basically tearing apart the EPA.
Yeah,
that agency was put in place by Richard Nixon, who, when you compare him to Trump, I mean, people saying this is like Watergate. No, it isn't, because Nixon, he did terrible things, but Nixon was very progressive when it came to OSHA and the EPA. He created those agencies
because we only got one. We only got one planet, Wayne. One mud ball that we're floating around the sun, going through the universe, and Earth is the true mothership. That's all we got. And we're sitting here crapping on it, polluting it. What about our babies? What about our grandchildren? What about their children?
Well, look, Trump doesn't care, but you never hear him talk about things like that. He lives for the moment. He lives for himself. He doesn't care about these things. His fans, the people who really supported him are now getting a big taste of what he was all about. China and putting sanctions on soybeans and sorghum. Well, guess what? How that's hurting states like Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas. They're out of business.
But you know what? The funny thing about that, I'm glad you mentioned those states. Now that we're kicking all the illegals out, no one's there to pick the fruit or the product off the vine.
True. I live in the strawberry capital of the United States here in Florida, and the people who would be normally out in the fields picking strawberries, they're hunkered down because they don't know when ICE is going to raid a field, and that's it. They take their kids away. So they're hunkering down, and the local stores, the Chamber of Commerce is raising hell, and all these Republicans who support these idiots like Rick Scott, these guy like Marco Rubio, that idiot. They're all saying, "Oh, Trump's hurting us." It's your Republicans that have done all this. So don't complain to me. You were out voting for these people, and now you don't have anyone to pick the crops. The daily onions in Georgia, the same thing. There's crops that are rotting in the field, and now Maryland, because Chesapeake, the blue crab season, they don't have anyone to pick the crabs, to can them and send. So not only are crabs very expensive, but actually, in one respect, it's good. They're going to this will let the crab population sort of
rebound.
So people are complaining. What a bushel of crabs costs now. It's double in price because there's nobody to pick the crabs. They were all here on those special visas, right? Those special temporary work visas. They've all been sent home.
The thing about it though, I try to always tell people on the show, we're headed for a perfect storm. All right. And I love to use this analogy right here. You got people on food stamps, right? But for real, these people are subsidizing your food as a working man or woman, because when they go down to Walmart or wherever to spend their little food stamp dollars, that actually helps Walmart to keep the prices down for everybody across the board. Well, now that Trump's going to give these people food boxes instead of the actual money, now
they've looked at these food boxes, and it's stuff that wouldn't pass. Wouldn't feed an animal. I mean, he thinks it's like when you used to go to these very expensive soirees in Washington, they'd give you a swag bag when you left, and that's what it's like. He says they'll give them a swag box of donated items or something. It's ridiculous. That's what he's used to.
Oh,
and of course, he liked to go to the soirees and the events where you get and the swag bag would be like a couple of round trip first class tickets on some airline and flying you to Europe a $500 a jar of beluga caviar.
Yes.
So this guy, he doesn't know how normal people live. He's never held a real job in his life.
No.
He inherited his money from his daddy, who, by the way, was infamous in New York for not renting to African Americans.
Because he was part of KKK.
So bad.
Let's say he was part of KKK.
He rented at a KKK rally in 1927. And I believe, and I can't prove it, and I've looked at this, and I've written about it, but I need to spend a lot of time in New York. I believe that Fred Trump, his father, was most likely a German agent during World War II, because a Nazi agent, because he volunteered to build barracks at 3 naval bases which were embarking troops to go to Europe, where you could actually count the troops, and of course there were people in this country who would radio that information to U-boats, German U-boats off the coast, so they know what ships to torpedo based on whether they had a large number of U.S. troops on board. And so Daddy Trump volunteered, of course he got paid for this, to build barracks at Chester, Pennsylvania, which was an embarkation point for troops that were coming out of basic training at Fort Dix.
Yes.
And at Newport News, Virginia, and in Norfolk, Virginia. And those troops were being trained at all kinds of training bases, Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia, Fort Monroe in Virginia. But why did Fred Trump pick those 3 particular bases to build barracks? Because that's where the ships were loading the newly trained troops, not only American troops, but Canadian troops coming down by train from Canada were embarked on the same ships, leaving those ports. So I do believe that when they had that big Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden, I believe it was in 1936, I think Fred was probably in the crowd.
That's diabolical. That's straight up diabolical. I mean, total traitor to the Republic, total traitor to freedom. I don't care what anybody says. I don't wish harm on no Nazi or nothing like that, but I am consciously aware of it. If they ever had true power, me and you would not be talking tonight. And so many people,
they may be getting very close. You got to figure the reason why Fred Trump was in the KKK in Queens is because the American Nazi Party hadn't formed yet. So where would he have gone later? I mean,
wow.
Nobody can tell me he changed his spots. He was just waiting for when the Nazis came. Look, Hitler didn't even hardly have a group in Germany in 1920 and 27.
Right.
So where would he have gone to? Well, they had a Klan, but the minute they started with the German-American Bund, they called it.
Yeah.
This was a pro-Nazi party. I'm sure Fred was in it, and I'm sure Fred did as much as he could for the Reich, including say, hey, look, I'll build barracks at these 3 naval bases. Yeah, and you'll be counting troop trains and giving the information to the guy with the wireless, the radio.
And all that stuff really does matter. It's these, whenever we're dealing with war and all that, the littlest act or the littlest thing that the small guy does can have major effects. Like you said, you rate on somebody.
Yeah.
Mm.
Woody Guthrie, Arlo Guthrie's dad, Fred Trump was so bad about refusing to rent to African Americans, and he was known as a slumlord. Woody Guthrie actually wrote and sang a song about Fred Trump.